And as a parent, that would always be my goal, is because I'm not going to be there forever telling them what to do. So I want to raise a child who I teach to turn inward to find the answers. So when there's a situation, no matter what it is, I want to respond with curiosity. I want to respond by asking questions that help that younger child or older child turn inward to find the answers, because that's where the truth is.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Leigh Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this week's episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast, entitled Dealing with Children's Tantrums and Rageful Behaviour, Laura Reardon and I discussed the best strategies for parents when faced with a child showing strong emotions, such as tantrums and outbursts. We discussed emotional regulation, what constitutes good and bad emotions, social and emotional learning, co-regulation, the Fawn Response, when are children old enough to develop emotional regulation, and Laura advises parents on the ABCs of emotional regulation. If you are a parent or soon to be a parent, this is an episode you really don't want to miss. Laura Reardon, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So Laura, to kick things off, could you share with the audience an overview of your background, including your experience as a parent and how you became a child behaviour specialist, a parent coach, an emotion coach, and an anxiety coach?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm just someone who's always been really interested in psychology and how, people's behavior can be impacted by what's happening within them and around them. I majored in psychology in college. At that time, I went off and worked in human resources because, again, even when I worked in business, there was always the focus on human behavior. And so when I had children, I really cared a lot about, skills like emotional intelligence skills. And so, in particular, I've come to focus in on emotional regulation. And as life would have it, I am in a family where emotional regulation can be challenging, in my kids' growing up years. And so I learned that first of all, my role as a parent was much more triggering than my role as a human resources manager. And I learned that the traditional parenting tools that I was taught in the books that I read and the classes that I went to were really not effective in showing my kids how and building my own emotional regulation skills. And so that started my journey of educating myself about how I could do a better job of building my own emotional regulation and supporting the development of emotional regulation in my children. And the reason I cared so much about emotional regulation is because it's the skills of emotional regulation, and I'll define those as essentially the ability to be with your emotions and respond in effective ways rather than ineffective ways, that can really lead to a more peaceful home, which I cared a lot about. And it can also support my children in growing up into emotionally regulated adults, which is that life skill that supports more successful relationships, more success professionally, and even better overall health. And so that was what led my journey, into the work that I do today.
Okay. Just to take you back a little bit, where do you think your initial passion for kind of psychology came from?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I guess I think of it as just sort of who I am, part of my temperament, what I'm naturally inclined to care about and have an interest in.
Interesting. So one word that you've said, well, two words that you've said quite a lot is emotions and regulation.
Yep.
And you kind of briefly described what that is. Could you maybe go into a bit more detail, maybe some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to start with a definition of the purpose of emotions. And the way I describe the purpose of emotions is to communicate information to us about our needs. So comfortable emotions communicate information about our needs that are being met, and uncomfortable emotions communicate information to us about our needs that are not being met. Therefore, I define emotional regulation as the ability to acknowledge our emotions and to respond with an attitude of curiosity about what they're communicating to us, and what they're communicating to us about our needs and how we can most effectively get our needs met. So that makes a lot of sense. But the reason that it's so challenging is because of how our nervous system unconsciously impacts our behavior. And so what I mean by that is when we're experiencing comfortable emotions, we are in a state of emotional regulation. We are able to do that thing. We are able to acknowledge our emotions and respond in helpful and effective ways. However, when we experience uncomfortable emotions, it can trigger a fear response in, an unconscious fear response, because our nervous system 24/7 is scanning our internal and our external world for cues of safety. And so when we experience uncomfortable emotions, our nervous system does not have the capacity to identify the difference between the uncomfortable emotions that we may experience in an actual life-threatening situation compared to the uncomfortable emotions that we may experience in everyday life. And so what happens is when our nervous system identifies a cue of I feel unsafe, our fight, flight, or freeze state gets triggered. And so instead of responding to our emotions in effective ways, what happens is we respond in defensive ways that are not helpful in getting our needs met. They in fact create the opposite. They create disconnection, they create chaos, and they basically set us up for failure in getting our needs met in effective ways, whether it's our own internal need or whether it's in our relationships. And so it can be really challenging when we're feeling those uncomfortable emotions to respond in effective ways.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As you were speaking then, what I was kind of envisioning in my mind was, when we're in that state of fight or flight, we go into a state of defense, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if someone, let's say for instance, someone says something to you and you feel like you're being attacked, whether you were or not verbally, the way that you go into a state of defense is to attack back, isn't it, normally?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And the other thing that came to my mind as well as you were speaking, I don't know if you're familiar with, what's the guy's name? He wrote The Chimp Paradox, Professor Stephen Peters.
No, I don't. I haven't read that book.
So he talks about the chimp mind and how the chimp mind kind of, throws the toys out of the pram rather than it being the human mind that's a bit more kind of calculated and, okay, let's just take stock of the situation and let's look at this and see what the best outcome will be. So those two things kind of came to mind. And another thing came to mind as you were speaking as well. So you were triggering off a lot of thoughts in my mind as you were speaking then. And the other thing, I don't know if you've come across nonviolent communication before.
Oh, sure. Yes. My work is in many ways based on that work.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, we'll probably come talk about that a little bit more as we go through. But
yeah, for sure.
Emotions is something that I've got a real interest in because, I'm aware of the effects that emotions can have on the physical body if they're not dealt with in the right way. I mean, what I would say is dealt with, I would say released. Like if you hold on to emotions, they can cause illness and pain. In terms of what we're discussing, so you kind of, I'm paraphrasing your term, bad emotions and good emotions. Can you describe what would be a good emotion and what would be a bad emotion?
Well, again, like for you, when I was listening to you, you triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind as well. And one of the things I'm thinking about is why emotional regulation is so challenging. And so, for example, for our children, the reason it's so challenging is because emotional regulation is something that we're not born with. It develops over time. And for some of us, we're born, we'll notice as parents, if we have multiple children, that some of our kids almost just seem to be born into the world in a way in which emotional regulation comes more naturally and comes more easily to them. And then for others, it will be more challenging. And so specifically, if we have children with sensory sensitivities, if we have deeply feeling children, if we have a child with an ADHD diagnosis or an autism diagnosis or many other individual differences, emotional regulation is going to be more challenging and it's going to take more time. For us as adults, we have a fully developed brain, but what happens is for many of us, we were either not taught the skills of emotional regulation, and or also we were raised in homes in which it was not safe to express negative, bad emotions. And so what that did is that essentially escalated our unconscious reaction to uncomfortable emotions. And so what happens is, if we were raised in a home in which when we expressed uncomfortable emotions, when we expressed negative emotions, our parents either ignored them or punished them or minimized them, you're fine, let's keep going, then the message that sent the message that sent to us essentially was our parents saying to us, I can't handle your negative emotions, and I don't think you can handle your negative emotions. And again, that just escalated our instinctual response to, associate potential danger around uncomfortable emotions. And so when our child then expresses uncomfortable emotions or negative emotions, it really triggers us. And then we get into generational cycles of, not being able to be with our emotions in effective ways.
Mm. So really what you're talking about when you're talking about expressing negative emotions, you're talking about, it might be crying, it might be tantrums, it might be throwing things around, slamming doors, that kind of thing. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what this can look like in real life as a parent with children is, for example, from our child's perspective, perhaps our toddler, we're in a store and we say no to that toy, or for, or perhaps there's a new sibling in the family, or for our older child, it's time to turn off their video game and do their homework. Or for us as parents, our kids are fighting, or they're being disrespectful or defiant. And so all of these experiences that we're having are creating uncomfortable emotions in us. And so instead of pausing and becoming curious about, what are my feelings communicating to me about my needs and how can I respond effectively? Instead, we're lashing out or we're avoiding. And so for our kids, that can look like crying, screaming, hitting, kicking, running away, being disrespectful or defiant, fighting with their sibling, all of these things. And then as parents, what it can look like is it can look like yelling, shaming, blaming, punishing, or withdrawing, physically or, emotionally from our children. And so when we respond to conflict in the home in these ways that can be instinctual for us, what it does is in the short term, it escalates the conflict. And in the long term, what we're doing is raising another generation of highly reactive people who will both in potentially their parenting lives, again, in their work relationships, it will have a negative impact. And also, to your point, it can impact negatively our overall health when we're not managing our emotions in healthy ways. And so, that's just some of what can happen. That's what can happen when we don't educate ourselves about what emotional regulation is and work to build our own regulation and respond to our children's challenging behavior in ways that build emotional regulation rather than build emotional reactivity. Because when we do that, we're giving our kids, again, that life skill that has multiple layers of benefits.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like part of what you're talking about there in the case of the parent is at the first stage, it's almost empathy for the child.
And that's exactly why I start with creating an understanding for why it makes so much sense that our kids can respond to big emotions with big behavior, and why we as parents can respond to our own big emotions and our kids' bigger emotions with our own big behavior. So everything that I teach is based on the foundation of compassion, because it makes so much sense based on our biology, and added to that based on our culture. So it's all about creating compassion.
Obviously that's the first step, I would guess.
First step, yes.
So is social and emotional learning different from emotional regulation?
It's all, in my opinion, a different name for the same thing. Some people call it emotional intelligence. Some people call it emotional regulation. Some people call it social and emotional learning is often the term that's used in an education environment. But in my mind, it's essentially all about learning to be with your emotions rather than ignoring them, minimizing them, or shutting down, and learning to, again, respond with curiosity for how to get your needs met in effective ways. And then when you add the other people in, like you would as a parent or a kid in a classroom or a teacher or somebody at work, it's about learning effective skills for how to communicate your own needs, listen with the intent of understanding the other person's needs, and then identifying solutions that will, acknowledge the needs of both people.
Yeah, it sounds to me like what you just described is actually needed for adults to adults as well as adults to parents as well, right?
Yeah, again, it's the life skill that supports our success in our personal relationships, our professional work, and our overall health. So absolutely. It's, I happen to focus in on working with parents and how they can build their own emotional regulation and how they can raise emotionally regulated adults. But for sure, this is a class that every human being could take.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that I guess kind of intrigues me, I've studied emotions for a long time. And one of the things I learned a long time ago, probably almost 20 years ago now, is that, and I think this comes from traditional Chinese philosophy, is that when something happens, we have an emotion. It could be fear, it could be anger, it could be grief, whatever. And when the emotion first comes into the body, it tends to go to the diaphragm, which is known as the halfway house of emotions. And then there's different options in terms of how you could release that emotion. One can be verbally. So you might scream, you might shout, whatever. But that's considered a healthy way to get rid of the emotion. Another healthy way to get rid of the emotion, it actually gets digested through the digestive tract. And you might even hear like a tummy rumble or gurgle or something like that as the emotion kind of leaves the body, so to speak. And the other thing that can happen to an emotion is that it can either get stuck in the diaphragm, and people that do manual therapy will know sometimes if they release someone's diaphragm physically with their hands, that the person might start crying or have like a massive emotional release when they're having their diaphragm worked on. But the other thing, and this is the thing that I guess impacts my work quite a lot, is that the emotion can get stored anywhere in the body. It can literally go anywhere. So, it might be, I can remember one story a long time ago, and a guy came to see me and he said he had some kind of problem. And then I basically did some energy work on him, and I released some emotions. And he come up off my treatment table and he said, "I lied to you." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I thought you was a charlatan." I said, "Okay, where's this going?" He said, I've had an ankle injury for about 6 years. And he said, "My pain's gone. What did you just do to me?"
Huh.
And I'd released some emotions that were just completely unrelated to his ankle problem. But instantly, his physical pain had gone. And the reason I bring that up is because, again, I'm just curious. I'm just thinking in terms of like children, could it be in some instances a good thing that they might scream and shout because it's actually getting the emotion out? They're actually, rather than storing it in their body, it's coming out. I mean, I know when I play tennis, I don't do it so much because I'm getting older, but I might play 2 or 3 really great shots and I've got an easy shot at the net and then I miss it. And that's really frustrating. So I've got the emotion of frustration. And my normal response is just to shout. And now, as soon as I've shouted, that emotion's gone, I can just carry on playing. But if I didn't shout, it kind of sits with me. And I'm, I might play bad for the next 2 games. So, I don't even know if you've kind of got a view on that, but I'm just wondering if there is a time where it is good to actually shout and scream and cry when you've got an emotion. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think this is, I love that you brought this up because it really gets right to co-regulation, which is essentially what co-regulation is it's recognizing our children's challenging behavior as dysregulation rather than assuming, as we are taught to do as parents, that our kids' behavior is intentional for the purpose of getting their way. And not to say that that can't happen, because if we're parents who, when we say no to the cookie or to the toy or to the turning off the video game, our child escalates and then ultimately we say, "Oh, okay," because we're uncomfortable with emotions and we need to shut them down and make them go away, as opposed to being comfortable with setting a limit and allowing for the emotions that come along with that limit. Then for sure, we are raising a child and teaching them to essentially become reactive as a way to get their way. That can be intentional. However, in the vast majority of cases, what's happening when our kids are showing challenging behavior is that they're in a state of dysregulation. And so when we look at behavior through that lens, which is so different than we really typically as parents are taught to think about behavior, when we look at behavior through the lens of regulation and dysregulation, then what makes sense is, instead of responding with yelling and punishment, etc., is to respond with acknowledging that our child is in a threat response. And so to respond in a way that helps them feel safe together with their emotions, which accomplishes 3 effective things. It accomplishes helping them regulate in the moment. And when we're regulated, we're naturally and biologically capable of doing all of those things that as parents we want for our children to do, to be able to listen, to learn, to cooperate, to problem solve, to use our executive functioning skills. And so when we respond to our child's challenging behavior in a way that holds limits, again, together with allowing for the emotions, just as the example that we talked about a moment ago, then we're helping them regulate in the moment. Also, when we respond in that way over and over and over again, we're basically wiring their brain to be able to tolerate and feel safe with uncomfortable emotions. So we're raising emotionally regulated adults rather than emotionally reactive adults. And third, it's an opportunity for an embodied learning experience where and then I'll talk in more detail about this in a moment, but whatever it is that we do to help them feel safe in that moment, they learn through an embodied experience. Oh, when I do this thing, this is how I feel in my body. And so that is really the most effective way that we can teach calming skills, which as parents, we love to do that. Oh, take a deep breath, or oh, do this. But it's through an embodied learning experience that we can really most effectively teach skills. And so all that to come back to your point, which is co-regulation is tricky because it looks different for every child and in every experience. So, for example, what might calm one child and help them feel safe to be safe with their emotions might be very triggering for another child. So it can look really different. It could be that physical touch is that thing that makes the child feel safe. It could be words of acknowledgement. You're not a bad kid. I see you're a good kid having a hard time. It could be and movement. It could be music. It could be a whole vast number of things that in that situation, at that stage of development and, with that child helps them feel calm. But all that to say, one of the most effective things that we can do when we're attempting to co-regulate is to help the child feel safe enough to cry, to feel safe enough to feel the feelings that they're experiencing. So it used to be that we would teach that when a child was angry, to teach them to stomp their feet or to punch a pillow. But it turns out that when we do that, we're helping them stay stuck in their anger. And it actually can escalate their fight or flight response. But when we instead help them feel safe enough to feel their true feelings, then that's when we can essentially do exactly what you're saying, which is get them out. Because of course we what's the saying? Feel it to heal it. And as an added layer, we can use that as an opportunity at times, not every time, but when the timing is right, we can take that opportunity to help our child connect with how their emotions feel in their body. And so when we help them connect with, well, okay, so I see you're so angry, or you're really feeling sad right now, where are you feeling that in your body? And when we can help them to learn to connect, that not just like, a lot of people talk about, help young children identifying names for emotions. Naming emotions can be helpful, and it absolutely can. But we can go a layer deeper, and we can also help them to connect the dots between having a name in their mind for the emotion and connect to their body. Where do they feel that in their body? And then to just sort of acknowledge that with awareness and compassion. It's really quite, it's quite a powerful thing that we can do.
Mm. When 35-year-old Amanda first scheduled to see me, she'd been suffering for 19 years from severe IBS, diarrhea and fecal incontinence, along with abdominal pain and bloating. Her condition had not only made life uncomfortable for Amanda, but very inconvenient as she had to walk 2 hours to work every day along a route that had public toilets, and she'd never been on holiday as an adult because of her condition. The only advice that several doctors and specialists had given Amanda was to take Imodium, and when she first saw me, she was taking 5 Imodium a day and wasn't getting any better. To help Amanda, I ran tests to find out what foods were right for her metabolic type, to see which foods she was sensitive to, and to assess her gut microbiome. Tests showed that Amanda had several food sensitivities and a parasite infection. Over the coming weeks, I coached Amanda to eat right for her type and to replace the foods she was sensitive to, and a protocol to deal with her parasite infection. And after 3 months, Amanda was IBS-free, and she also reported her skin was much improved and she had lost weight. And she booked a holiday for her and her husband to New York, as they'd never been on a proper honeymoon because of her IBS. And if you're suffering like Amanda was, and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Amanda. Now, back to the podcast. Yeah, the other thing that, again, kind of came up in my mind as you were speaking, and this would be interesting to get your view on as well, is that, you know, sometimes as children, the only way they feel they can be, or to get attention, let's say it's the middle child and they feel like they're not getting as much attention as the older and the younger child. And they've tried being good and that didn't work. So now they're being bad, in inverted commas. Now they're getting attention because they're getting a response from the parent. Is that something that you've kind of witnessed?
Yeah, well, you're going right on to the next point perfectly, which is, you know, co-regulation is that in the moment tool. And so, you know, when our toddler grabs from somebody because that they wanted that toy, you know, we can co-regulate. Perhaps one example of a way we could do that is to, again, with our words, acknowledge that they're not a bad kid. They're a good kid that's just struggling and learning and growing. You know, oh, you wanted that train. I get it. Yeah, we can't grab, but what would work better, you know? Because again, when we involve them in the problem solving, we're going to naturally elicit their motivation and cooperation, and develop problem solving skills and confidence and competence and all of those good things instead of just telling them what to do. But that said, and you know, and for our older child, you know, if they come home from school and, you know, they're just speaking in a disrespectful way, you know, hey, not okay to talk to me that way, but I can see you've had a tough day. Can I help? What's going on? You know, I want to understand. What can I do? You know, that's the in the moment tool. That's the co-regulation. And if it's a one-time thing, it's a one-time thing. But if that's happening over and over again, if this reactivity is showing up over and over again, what we want to do outside of the moment is we want to reflect. We want to problem solve, like, okay, what's happening? What's underneath this behavior? Because we know behavior is communication. And again, it could just be an in the moment thing, a one-time thing, and that's fine. And that makes sense. And that's life. You know, just like you and I might come home from a tough day of work and we might not be our best. And we might not show up as our best, but the next night and most nights, you know, things go pretty calmly. But again, whether it's with ourselves as parents or whether it's with our kids, it's that reflective work that we want to do. So we want to become curious. We want to become curious about what's triggering our kids' behavior. And it could be a very, there's just so many things it could be. It could be environment. Is our kid getting enough sleep? Is our kid getting enough movement? Is our kid getting enough downtime? Are they getting enough connection? Sure, that could be a reason for triggering reactivity, because connection is the number one thing that creates safety in mammals. So that would make a lot of sense. If they're not getting enough connection, that could create that reactivity in them. And so again, it's not that then giving them that connection would be like spoiling them or giving them, you know, and again, when we're looking through the lens of understanding their behavior in most cases is unconscious and automatic, not this planned like thing, then we can look at it through that lens with curiosity. We want to approach behavior with curiosity. For what are their, if we go back to the definition of emotions, if they're responding to their emotions with behavior, which is what we all do, you know, again, we can build our emotional regulation so we can get better at responding to our emotions in more effective ways. But it's our instinct for us to respond to our big emotions with big behavior. And so if we can look at it through that lens, then we want to become curious about what are the emotions and what are they communicating about that child's needs. And sure, connection is one possible reason. It could be many other things as well. It could be, are they struggling in school? Are they struggling in social relationships? Are they responding to our own reactivity? Again, is it a physical need? We want to approach it from the point of view of curiosity. Could it be anxiety? Could it be, a whole host of things? But yes, we want to respond with curiosity and then meet that need.
Yeah, I guess the other thing, again, that popped up in my mind as you were speaking, as well as what you call big behavior, some children act in the opposite way, don't they? They become very withdrawn.
Yes, really good point. So oftentimes it's the big behavior, but as we know, fight, flight, or freeze can be, the fight is typically that aggressive lashing out behavior. The flight is when we've got the kid that just, disappears, runs, literally like a young kid might physically run away. Or for our older kids, they might just go away. Now, of course, some of that can be developmentally appropriate as kids get older. So we have to look at the individual situation and see what's going on and what makes sense and what doesn't. And then for our kids who go into a freeze response, they might withdraw, avoid, shut down. I mean, really avoiding can be both running away and, just kind of going within, going inside and shutting down from relationships. And so it's when our kids that are acting out is when we want to, almost reduce the energy, calm things down. And, but when our kid is going into shutdown, that's when we need to introduce the energy and actually increase the energy. So yes, we want to be responsive in whatever way is appropriate given our child's reaction. And interestingly, there's another response you may be familiar with called a Fawn Response, which is really important for parents to be aware of, that it exists, because what it looks like is really good behavior. Fawn Response is essentially responding to what's threatening us. So it could be our parent yelling at us with the intent of appeasing our, that thing that is a threat to us. So you have to kind of be aware, like if as a parent you struggle with yelling and screaming and demanding, and your kid responds with cooperation, you might just think everything's working really effectively. But we want to be thoughtful and aware of that, because it could be that our child is responding with a fawn response. And again, we're still doing that thing. We're still raising that highly reactive kid instead of raising that regulated kid who is creating safety and tolerance around emotions. That child who's being very cooperative is not feeling safe or comfortable with emotions. They're feeling terrified and that they need to protect themselves by being really cooperative. And I'll actually use myself as an example of another interesting way that on the surface looks great, but really I was doing the same thing, which is I was never the yeller. I was the sort of got stuck in logic person. So when my kids would be highly reactive, I would stay calm. In their younger years, I did all those things like consequences and rewards and ignoring unwanted behaviors. And then I moved to what I thought was going to work. And it makes sense that it would work, which is teaching calming skills. So I would stay calm when they lost it. And then at a later time, I would teach skills like, okay, so next time this happens, what can you do to stay calm and respond in a more effective way? Well, again, all of that on the surface sounds really great, but actually, if you look at it at a deeper level, what was happening is that I was staying calm in the moment, but I was not connecting. I was not co-regulating. And so I was essentially shutting down. I was having my own shutdown response, where I was emotionally withdrawing. That was my response. So on the surface, I looked calm, but it's not just about calm. It's about calm and connection. Co-regulation and connection you could use interchangeably. And added. And so essentially I was sending that same message as a parent who was yelling, I can't handle your emotions and I don't think you can handle this emotion. So I need to disconnect from you right now. And when I was in the after moment teaching calming skills, what I didn't understand that I think is so important to educate parents on is that I would have this expectation. We identified a skill. I would expect my kid the next time they got upset to use that skill. And when the same thing happened over and over again, I would wonder what's wrong with my kid and what's wrong with me. What I didn't understand is that because I was raised in a family, and I think all of us, at least in the United States, are raised in a culture in which we really value independence. And so I had the expectation that to be a good parent, which I was passionate about, I mean, all of us are parents, are trying our best. There is no question about that, with the skills and education and abilities and background and life experiences and genetics that we all have. We are all just doing our best. And my best was to think that to be a good parent, I had to raise my child to independently be able to manage their emotions. And it's kind of a painful memory, to be honest with you, but I have a memory of my child was like 8 or 8-ish. I don't know. I don't know. I remember, but I don't remember the exact age. But I remember her struggling to manage her emotions. She wasn't even lashing out. I don't really remember the details. I just remember her looking at me and saying, Mom, I'm just waving to her now. She's leaving. Mom, can you help me calm down? And I looked at her and I said, no, it's your job to learn how to calm down on your own. I was doing my best. And I see now that what I understand now that I didn't understand then is that the ability to regulate your emotions is not something, again, as I mentioned earlier, not something you're born with. It's something that develops slowly over time, and that we cannot expect our children to have the capacity, the brain development to, when they're experiencing big emotions, to pause, as we would expect an adult to practice building, to pause, to identify something to help them be with their emotions without lashing out or shutting down, and then to respond in more effective ways. We cannot expect our child to implement the skills that we're teaching them until they have the brain development to self-regulate. And so, all that to say that, I don't remember all that to say. I don't remember where I was going with that, but that's whatever question you asked me, that's what came to mind. And that's what I wanted to share.
Sure. So
if I didn't answer your question though, please tell me your question again, and I will. So
just talking about, obviously, the child developing this emotional intelligence, and as you've said, every child's different. Is there kind of like an age range where most children kind of do develop that level of emotional intelligence?
Well, infants have an extremely limited ability to calm themselves. For example, they could maybe get their finger in their mouth, or, kick the crib. That sometimes pressure can, help someone to regulate. But their abilities are extremely limited. And our job as parents at that age is to meet their needs and help them stay calm and feel that their needs are met. And that's a really important way. That's when the work can begin, as early as when our children are infants, in raising kids that are emotionally regulated. And that's how we do it when our kids are that age. When our kids get to be in the preschool years, for many of them, their ability to regulate their emotions can begin to build. But it's so individual is what we're learning. It used to be that we're still learning. There's so much learning happening right now, as you know, with the nervous system and how it affects our behavior. And it used to be that we would talk a lot about the prefrontal cortex and how, it's not fully developed until age 25, and that our regulation was really dependent on that. But what we're learning to understand, and there's a really growing focus on individual differences, and we're just learning to appreciate that there is really no typical and no average and no expectations. It's all about the individual child. And, again, we tend to, some of us as parents have those experiences where we know we have that kid who just seems to come more easily for them, and their brain is not fully developed. So it doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. We're realizing that, it happens at this magical time when the brain is fully developed. For some of us, and that continues into adulthood, emotional regulation is just more challenging. But, the good news is that we all have the capacity to build our emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you can, I'm sure you can have people go their entire life and they never develop that emotional intelligence. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows an old person that, they're just always losing it, right?
Yeah.
You say,
yeah, for sure.
You say this, the slightest little thing and they fly off the handle,
Right. And we can, in the same way that we now look at ourselves and our children through a new lens of compassion, we can look at that other person in our lives with compassion. And like with our children, we can still have our boundaries, but they can be compassionate boundaries. When we understand that, that person probably had experiences in their life that made emotions feel not safe for them. And again, this is when we get into generational trauma. And they probably weren't ever taught skills, alternative skills. What could what would be an alternative to responding in a reactive way? What's a way to pause? I teach a tool to parents. I always start, the first thing I do to help, because of course it always starts with ourselves as parents. And then we can, once we build our own emotional regulation, then we can respond to our children's behavior in a way that builds theirs. Like, for example, I talked about the co-regulation, but in order to be able to co-regulate with your child, that assumes an awful lot. That assumes emotional regulation in ourselves as an adult. So that's a big step. And so what I teach is a 3-step process for how to build emotional regulation in yourself. And it starts with looking at our own environment, because of course, when we're not getting, and as parents, unfortunately, we often don't get enough sleep or enough connection or enough movement or enough alone time or enough, all of those self-care needs. But we want to have the awareness, because I know when I was a parent growing up, we didn't have this information when my children were young. And so admittedly, I wore it as a badge of honor that I didn't meet my needs and that I prioritized my children's needs above mine. I thought that's how I was being a good parent. I understand now that, in fact, one of the ways I can be a good parent is by starting with meeting my own needs, the whole oxygen mask analogy, because when you're not getting enough sleep or whatever need that you're not getting met, it shows up as uncomfortable emotions, because our emotions actually start as body sensations or thoughts before they become, emotions and feelings that we can name in our brain. So when we have that understanding that when we, for example, feel the sensation in our body of being tired or hungry or whatever it is, that's going to show up as an uncomfortable emotion, which is going to then show up as us getting triggered into a fight, flight, or freeze response. That's going to show up as us yelling or shutting down or whatever it is that we go to. And so when we understand this, we can understand why we want to problem solve where we can to get our needs met to the greatest capacity that we can. And I always say that if nothing else, because sometimes this can only add just another layer of stress on a parent, when they think, oh my gosh, I am in survival mode. I'm lucky if I can get through the day. Don't tell me that I have to then do this, add this to my list. it just creates stress, which of course is not helpful. So I always say, if the only self-care you can add to your day is compassion, you're doing your best. You did your best today, and your best is always good enough. Then that's, if the only self-care you can give yourself in a day is compassion, then that's the self-care that you give yourself. But so again, it starts with creating an environment that supports and sets ourselves up for success in regulating our emotions. But an in the moment tool that I teach is called the ABCs for, staying calm when you feel like you're going to lose it. And so A is for awareness. Once you have that awareness that you're feeling uncomfortable emotions, and we can work on developing our awareness by, again, having that understanding that emotions start as with what's going on inside our body and outside our body in terms of sensations. What are we feeling? What are we hearing? What are we what are we seeing? All of this has impact on how we feel. And so when we have that moment, we can build our awareness of our emotions by building our awareness of what's happening inside of our body, and an awareness of happening what's outside of our body as well. So in other words, just being present to the moment, which many of us are not very good at these days, because the minute we have a minute, what do? We look at our phone, or we look at a screen, or what have you. So when we understand this, we can build moments, mini moments into our day when we're in the car waiting for our child to come out, or when we need a break from looking at our computer screen because we're working. We can just take that micro moment to be present to what's happening. And as we incorporate that into our daily life, we can increase our awareness of our emotions and be better at noticing that moment before we react, because we're noticing, oh, okay, I'm feeling triggered. And then once we have that awareness, it always starts with, it's always body up. So we start with our body. And B is for breathe, because for many of us, taking that deep breath in and letting our exhale be longer than our inhale can be that thing that helps us be with our emotions in the moment without lashing out or shutting down. But of course, B is just symbolic for whatever helps you in that moment. For some people, it's that feeling of pressure. So perhaps you could sit down with your back against the wall and your feet on the ground and feel that pressure. Perhaps you could run your hands under some water, take a sip of water, step into another room, step outside, hum, turn some music on, visualize something calming. It's about figuring out what works for you. Again, individual differences. Different things work for different people, but it's about creating a plan, becoming curious, what helps me stay calm, and then creating a plan where that's your go-to thing. Maybe it's a mantra, something like that. But, and then C is for calm your thoughts, because it's natural, just like it's natural for us to have big emotions and then have big behavior. It's also natural for us to have negative thoughts. And so, just like, our ancestors, it helped them survive if they saw a stick and assumed it was a snake, or if they saw a tan rock and assumed it was a tiger. So we evolved to think the worst because it benefited our survival. And so we do the same with ourselves and with our kids. So our kid grabs something from their friend and we think, my child is mean. As parents, we yell and we think we're a bad parent. Or we're having a worry thought and, we're having a catastrophizing thought. Whatever is happening, our kid gets a bad grade and we assume they'll never graduate, catastrophizing thought. We're assuming the worst. So we want to take a moment once we calm our body enough that we have that capacity to kind of tune in with our logic. We want to take a moment, become curious. What are our thoughts? Again, compassion. makes sense I'm having that negative thought, and then consider a more calming thought. For example, instead of our kid is mean, it's our kid is learning and growing, and they don't yet have the capacity to respond to their emotions in more effective ways, but they're a good kid. Or if we just yelled at our kid, we could have the thought, getting it wrong is how I learn what I need to learn to get on the path to getting it right in the future. And mistakes, growth mindset, mistakes are how we learn and grow. Or it could be just something as simple as, I can handle this. I've got this. Or my kid is a good kid. I'm a good parent. Whatever it is. Again, I work with parents one-on-one to kind of customize and create these plans so that in the moment they have this plan ready to go. And this ABC, as you practice it and really take ownership of it and internalize it, in some cases can be like this, we go right through it. In other cases, it could be over a period of 24 hours, so it's an in the moment tool, but depending on where you're at in building your own emotional regulation and what's happening, the level of reactivity that you're feeling in that moment. It's something that is just, again, individual to what's happening in the moment.
Sharon, a 52-year-old business consultant, came to see me because she was waking up every night and not able to get back to sleep, leaving her exhausted during the day, which was very concerning for Sharon. She occasionally had a dull ache in her stomach, and she also suffered from acne. But Sharon was most desperate to get to the bottom of her sleep issue. Following a series of tests, it was found that Sharon had a gut infection, which was the likely cause of her waking at night and causing the stomachache. And she also had a leaky gut and food sensitivities, which may have played a role in her acne. Sharon went on a low FODMAP diet and supplementation plan to rebalance her gut microbiome and help repair her gut lining and to support her immune system. Within days, Sharon felt much better. Within weeks, Sharon was sleeping through the night, her stomach ache vanished, her skin was clear, her energy levels increased, and her weight, particularly around her middle, in her own words, simply dropped off. If you're suffering with sleep, gut, or skin issues and want to get to the root cause, and you'd like to achieve a great result just like Sharon, then go to www.bodycheck.co.uk, that's bodychek.co.uk, to request your consultation. Now, back to the podcast. So, ABC, so awareness, breathing, calm your thoughts.
Calm your thoughts, yes.
Nice. I just want to take you back, actually. So you spoke about the Fawn Response.
Yes.
Now, when you were talking about that, so again, just to remind people in case they forgot, what you were talking about is when people feel fear and therefore they comply. Good behaviour. We saw a lot of that, didn't we, in the last 3.5 years? People being fearful and therefore complying because they felt that was the only way they were going to stay safe.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. And of course, you saw the other two. You saw we're feeling fear, and so we lash out, and we, you could say that either way. You could say that for example, the aggression that we would see on planes when people would travel on planes, and the refusal to go by the rules of the plane and wear the mask, and that could be. Again, it's seeing when we see things through this new lens, we can see things with compassion, and we can say, oh, wow, it really makes sense. That guy's not just a jerk. That person was struggling and feeling fearful and reacting in the moment. And, so we could look at it in any extreme and understand that it's a fear response. And people often say to me, it seems like kids are more anxious these days. Do you attribute that to, attribute that to COVID? And I always say I don't know, because I do think two things. I think it would make a lot of sense that we're seeing more anxiety or anxious feelings in general, because the messages that we all received over the COVID time was the world is not safe. You are not safe. So that would make a lot of sense that our kids are struggling more with anxiety. And I think that's probably the case. And I think there's just like a lot of things in life, more awareness. And again, I'll use myself as an example. I never thought of myself as an anxious person because that's just not, that's not the way I was raised. Nobody was, we were, I was an 80s kid, like we were just raised to take care of ourselves. And, there were lots of good things about it. We were very independent. But nobody was paying any attention to our emotional needs for sure. And so I just, that would have never been a thought that ever occurred to me. And then years and years later, when we were in family counseling and trying to learn how to manage the emotions in our home in more effective ways, I had an opportunity to meet with a therapist one-on-one. And I remember vividly saying to him, I have a family member that struggles with anxiety, but I never have. And I just, I've always been so grateful for that. Like, oh yeah, that's just not something I've ever had to deal with. And he looked at me, I'll never forget. And just very thoughtfully and calmly and professionally just said, oh, that's not the way I experienced you. So yes, I've learned self-awareness about myself. Turns out I am an anxious person and I didn't have that awareness. So I think it's probably like most things in life, a messy mix.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting world that we're living in at the moment, because it seems that, those that are pulling the strings, so to speak, keep bringing out more and more reasons for us to be fearful and anxious. Like, first of all, it was a virus. Now it's the climate or the weather. They're telling us the weather's going to kill us in Europe at the moment. And as I was saying to you before we started recording, it's only 20 degrees Celsius where I am today. I mean, it's actually quite cold for this time of year, but yet we're being told, oh, we're going to die because the weather's getting too hot.
Yeah, I think as an individual, I've always felt my power in my individual family. Like that's where I feel like I've had, that's where I have the power and control to make a positive contribution. And I think that's just me and that's just who I am and what I have to offer the world. And so that's part of what fuels my passion about educating parents about emotional regulation and how they can build it in themselves and how they can build it in their children, because I think it's such a powerful thing in creating more peace and compassion and how to communicate effectively and solve problems collaboratively and all of those things that I'd like to see happening more, not just in my own individual family, but in the world. And I feel that that's the power that we have as parents. We have the power to raise a new generation of emotionally regulated adults. And for sure, there's a lot of real challenging issues to be managed in the world today, as there have been in every day and every moment in history. And so if we can be approaching those challenges in emotionally regulated ways where there's a place for emotions to be acknowledged, and we're curious about our own emotions and needs and the emotions and needs of the person across the table from us or across the world from us. And then we're open to communicating in effective ways that create connection rather than disconnection, and listening with the intent of understanding rather than proving the other person wrong. And then we're open to collaborative problem solving. These are the things that I care about in my own family and that I feel I have the power to contribute to the world as a large, one family at a time.
Yeah. Could you maybe give us an example? Either it could be your own family, it could be maybe a parent that you've coached where they've started off in one situation, maybe where a kid's in a really kind of almost uncontrollable kind of state, and take us through kind of a journey on how they've improved. Do you have any kind of examples of that?
Sure. I mean, they're all examples of that. And that's essentially what it's about. And that was what was life-changing for me. And what I learned is that the way that I was responding to behavior was, again, responding with, I'll go through like what are the common mistakes that parents make and why are they not effective? So we're all taught to use consequences, rewards, and, or to ignore onto unwanted behaviors. And the reasons that those things are not effective is because, for example, let's talk about consequences and rewards. On the surface, they make a lot of sense. What they do is they essentially, our kid will be inspired to do the thing or not do the thing, to get the reward or to not get the punishment. And so it can be really effective and it's logical and all makes sense. But the reason that it's not effective is because, first of all, it assumes an awful lot of things that are often not true. It assumes that our child has the brain development, the skills, and the capacity in that moment, meaning they're well rested, well fed, not particularly stressed, nothing happening to put them in a fear state, on and on. It assumes that all of these things are in place and therefore our kid has the capacity to do the thing or not do the thing that they want. And that's just, so it's just realistically, that's not often the case. And that can be a reason why they're not effective. Another reason they may not be effective is because depending on our kid, the kid with the Fawn Response, I bet it's going to be pretty darn effective, and yet effective on the surface, but not really in meeting our long-term goals. So what it can do is it can put short-term control ahead of long-term learning. But then also for some of our kids, in fact, it will only escalate the storm, because for our aggressive kids, if they experience a negative, something negative like, do this, or being yelled at or being punished, it's just going to escalate the storm in the short term. It's not as effective as co-regulating, because co-regulating is going to get you everything you want. It's going to get the kid to calm down. It's going to get the kid to act in cooperative ways, listen to you, if there's, a conflict, to collaboratively work together to resolve that conflict. So it's going to get you the short-term behavior that you want, but it's also going to get you the long-term raising an emotionally regulated adult, which is that life skill that again improves our personal relationships, our work performance, and our overall health. So it's like the win-win. So yes, it's, there's some, it's so understandable why we use it as parents, because in the short term, it can be effective, but again, not for everybody, because it can just escalate the situation depending on our kid's temperament, or individual difference. So that's why it's not the most effective choice. That said, I will acknowledge that as parents, this is real world stuff. Like, we are all just surviving the day. And if you have to use some consequences and rewards to get through the day, fine, do it. Just have this awareness that's not the most effective choice. And that when you, as a parent, have the capacity and the time, know that there are different ways that you can respond that will have real short and long-term benefits. And so it's just having the awareness that there's another more effective tool in the toolbox. So when you have the capacity, pick up that tool instead. But yeah, do what you need to do to get through the day. We're just human beings, and we're all doing our best, and our best is always good enough. And ignoring, that's not effective because, again, it can look on the surface to be effective because it can sometimes, stop the behavior that we don't want, But again, it's long-term. What we're doing is, as mammals, when we feel threatened, when we feel scared, when we feel unsafe, it's our instinct to want to be with a caregiver who we feel safe with. And so as a safe caregiver, if we choose the tool of ignoring when our kid is behaving in a way that we don't want to have them behave. And if we're looking at through the lens of neuroscience and we're understanding that their behavior is rooted in a threat response, then we understand that what we're doing is the same thing. We are fueling the fire of creating fear and reactivity around emotions, because when that child is feeling big emotions and acting out, instead of us co-regulating, bringing them in, helping them feel safe, we're saying, no, our love is conditional. We only are here for you to help you stay safe when you are acting like we want you to act. So again, I've done it as a parent. Every parent out there is going to continue to do it at times. We just want to have that awareness that there is a more effective tool in the toolbox. Mm. So all that to get back to your question, which is, so what are the benefits? What are the changes that you see? And so when we start using the tool of co-regulation over using consequences, rewards, ignoring unwanted behaviors, what we create is connection. And connection in our relationships is the most powerful thing in creating safety in our relationships. And we know that when we feel safe, that we're going to be having the biological capacity to act as our best selves. So all that to say that is the main thing that changes. That is the main thing that we all get, is that responding to conflict in a way that creates connection, as opposed to responding to conflict in a way that creates disconnection. That's essentially what we're doing.
Yeah, it's the phrase, connect before you correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what's underneath that saying.
Yeah. One more thing I want to ask you, and I guess it's quite a topical thing, and it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent, is that, because of what's being pushed in schools today, there's more and more children that are, how can I put it politely, being told that they're in the wrong body, that they're confused about their gender, to the point where, they might be going home to their parents and saying, it might be a little boy saying, I want to be a little girl. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being transgender, but I'm just looking back when I was at school in the 70s and the 80s, that just, no one thought about that. So there's clearly an agenda going on and putting these thoughts into children's head. I'm just wondering if you've got any advice for parents that perhaps are going through that.
I think the most effective thing that we can do to get a child to look internally for their answers rather than externally for their answers is actually, it can be really tied to emotions and how we respond to emotions. Because if, for example, when our child looks at us and says, oh, Mom, you look sad, or you look angry. And I know I've done it. It's an instinct to be like, oh, no, I'm not angry. I'm not sad. Or when we look at them and they're, again, feeling maybe, whatever they're feeling, and we do the, oh, you're fine, or you're not sad, you're fine, you're not angry, whatever it is we tell them they're not feeling, or whatever it is we say we're not feeling, we're sending the message to our child that they can't trust themselves to know what they know. They have to look outside of themselves to know what they know. Mm. And so, for all sorts of reasons, for example, when our child grows up to be a teenager and they're no longer looking to us for the answers, but they were raised to look externally for answers, of course, they're going to be looking to their peer group for the answers. So for all sorts of reasons, it's really benefits our child when we, encourage them to look internally for their answers, and when we don't deny emotions that exist.
So how would you do that?
Well, I guess what comes to mind is, again, the examples that I kind of gave already. But if you have a specific example in mind, I'd be happy to respond to it. But those are the main things I think of, that, again, when we're feeling an emotion and our child names it, like, oh, you look sad, and we deny it, or when they express a feeling to us and we deny it, those are the examples. Those are the real life examples of how we can either support or not support. So when our child says to us they're sad, instead of doing what many of us were raised with when our parents would, again, ignore, punish, or minimize, instead what we can do is we can be with them in their emotions. When our child tells us they're feeling sad, we can acknowledge that and we can be with them. And when we do that, so many good things happen. We can just, again, it's like co-regulation. It really depends on the child and the situation, what's going to work. But if our child is feeling sad, we can acknowledge that and we can just say, I see you're feeling sad right now. And, let me sit here with you right now. It looks like maybe you could use some company. And what we're doing is we're validating they know their feelings. They know who they are inside. And we're validating, what we're also doing in that moment is we are helping them develop a tolerance for uncomfortable emotions so that they over time learn to be with uncomfortable emotions without lashing out or shutting down. And I find it interesting because it makes me think of, you'll hear those people that say, oh, we don't want to teach about emotions. We don't want to make our kids soft. In my opinion, it's those of us who were raised by people who responded to our emotions in reactive ways, who shut them down, who ignored them, who punished them, who minimized them. We grew up to be weak people. We were weak with our emotions because we didn't have the capacity to be with them and, again, respond with curiosity for what they were communicating to us and then responding in effective ways. In my opinion, that's the definition of strength. My definition of weakness or fragility is when we can't handle our emotions. We can't handle our kids' emotions. And so we lash out, we respond with fear, we're afraid, and we lash out or we shut down. It's understandable. I have compassion for it, but I don't see that as strength. I see teaching emotional skills as teaching emotional strength.
But in the example of, say, a 7-year-old boy comes home from school one day and says to his mum, I want to be a girl. How would you coach the parent in that situation? Would it be a case of asking them how they feel about being a boy compared to how do you feel about being a girl? Would it be something along those lines?
I think it's about responding with curiosity, like compassion and curiosity is what I come back to in everything that I teach. So yes, if my child came home and said, if my boy came home and said, I think I might be a girl, I would respond with curiosity. And, it's actually interesting because it's the same way I would respond if my teenager came home and I caught them smoking. I would respond with curiosity. And this is why. Because when we respond with our own agenda, we create reactivity. Nobody likes to be told what to do. And so if I responded, again, it would make sense. My goodness, it would make all the sense in the world if I caught my kid smoking and I reacted by saying, don't you dare. And I mean, to be honest with you, I was that parent who thought if my kid ever smoked, I would literally kick them out of the house and they would not be allowed to live in my home because I thought that would have been the most effective way to get them to stop. What I've learned is this, and I, there's, been in our extended family some, situation with a person who was alcohol dependent. And so really serious situations where I have learned, in fact, the most effective way is to respond with curiosity. Because when we do that, for example, if I say to my kid, what what makes you think that? Tell me more. Or, for my child who came home and says, I think might be a girl, or for my older child who came home and I caught them smoking, I would say, tell me more. So tell me what about this is good for, what do you like about it? Like, what good things does this bring into your world? And then they feel really heard and understood, and their defenses are down. And so is there anything you don't like about it? Like, are there any negative parts of this? And this is where you help your child, instead of being like, reactive and doing something based on someone else's agenda. This is when you get them to really turn inside and know themselves. And as a parent, that would always be my goal, is because I'm not going to be there forever telling them what to do. So I want to raise a child who I teach to turn inward to find the answers. So when there's a situation, no matter what it is, I want to respond with curiosity. I want to respond by asking questions that help that younger child or older child turn inward to find the answers, because that's where the truth is.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question just because, I just see it being a massive problem. If you look at the data on it, people that have transitioned are something like 50% more likely to commit suicide than people who haven't. It could potentially be, that's not even considering the effects of the medications they go on and the surgeries they go on and all that kind of stuff, plus the potential kind of mental aspects it can have on someone. So I think that could be quite useful to parents out there to have that skill if they're faced with that kind of situation.
Yeah, I wouldn't begin to present myself as an expert in that particular topic. I would just say that in general, I would always respond with curiosity. And I would add that certainly, I mean, again, I don't pretend to be an expert in this area, or I don't even know what the laws are, but I would certainly think that when a child is a minor, that you wouldn't want to make any major decisions, but that you would want to encourage internal reflection, an ongoing internal reflection over time. Because again, the answers are always within.
Yeah. Awesome. Really enjoyed our conversation today, Laura, but what's next for you?
Well, actually, I'm just beginning the process of writing a book.
Oh, awesome.
So I'll let you know when it's out.
Have you got the title, what it's going to be called yet?
I do have the title in mind, and it might change by the time it comes out. But right now the title is what is it? It's the Child Behaviour book for parents who don't have time to read.
Brilliant.
Because that was me.
Yeah.
And that is me. I'm always reading child behavior books, but it's hard. It was hard. Now it's different because my kids are older, but when you have young children, it's wow. It's like self-care, trying to have the time to read a book on top of everything else that you're doing. And so some people like to learn through podcasts, but some people do prefer through reading. But again, it's just challenging having that time. So it's just, the idea is to create some really powerful, concise information to share this message.
That's great. And where can people find you online?
People can find me on my website at laurareardoncoaching.com. I encourage anyone who's interested in one-on-one support to visit. I offer a personalized parenting plan because one of the things I'm passionate about is making coaching really accessible. Most coaching packages are for months and extremely expensive. And I want to make one-on-one coaching available to as many people as possible. And so this is an opportunity to work with me for one session where together we create a plan for how to, a customized, holistic plan for how you can work to build your own regulation as an adult, as a parent, and how you can respond to your biggest parenting challenge in a way that builds emotional regulation in your child. And also I offer a free resource. We talked about the ABCs for how to stay calm when you feel like you're going to lose it in the moment. And I offer that as a free tool on my website for anyone who'd be interested in having that accessible to them. I encourage people to take a picture so it's always on your phone, or go old school and print it out and put it on your refrigerator.
Great stuff. I'll make sure your website details are on on the show notes as well.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and I always appreciate the opportunity to get this message out.
Yeah, and back at you really. I really enjoyed our discussion today. I could talk about emotions all day, so I really enjoyed it.
I could too, and thank you for your podcast, because I learn a lot by listening to you and to your guests, because yes, we share that passion for the topic of emotions.
Oh, thank you very much. So that's all from Laura and me for this week. But don't forget, you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.